Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday and welcome to the Sisters Interview. I'm Ashaksi from Untitled, and this is my sister, Sir Rifkin from Untitled, and we interview people from around the known world. Tonight, our very special guest is Sir Raymond the Quiet, the premier member of the Walker of the Way in the Outlands, Knight, Pelican, and Laurel. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. We like to start these interviews by asking how you found the SCA and what drew you into it.
Okay, first of all, I wanted to give a special announcement that this morning I had my COVID vaccine for Pfizer. So within a month, I'll be able to go out and do stuff again. So I'm very excited about that and hope everybody else can get it. And I've had absolutely no reaction to it so far. So
that is great.
Fantastic.
Yeah, my entrance to the SCA is kind of unique than most people. So in 1970, I was interested in gaming, and I subscribed to a gaming zine, a Dippy zine, that was based on the game Diplomacy. Anyway, the guy was living in New York who was publishing it. In one of his articles, he gave a review of a revel that he went to in New York in 1970. And so that kind of went into the back of my mind. And it's like, wow, that'd be great. And then 2 years later, I was gaming at a friend's house on Saturday. And he said, well, I can't play next week because I'm going to have a bunch of science fiction people over, and we're going to start a group of the Society for Creative Anachronism. And I said, I want to be in that. So there were two of us gaming buddies, and then about 4 people from the science fiction club. And we sat around his pool table and had our first meeting. And he was Seneschal, and I ended up being Harold. And I don't know if that was a wise decision, eventually being Raymond the Quiet and being Harold, but that was my job at the time. But we sat around the table, and the first thing we tried to do was come up with a name for the group. And having 6 people agree on a name is like, pulling teeth, literally. He wanted to name the group Malden. And it's like, well, that sounds cool. Well, what is Malden, right? And he was like, well, that's Judge Roy Bean's hangman's name. And we all go, this is supposed to be a medieval group. So at the time, he had an encyclopedia right there. And one of the volumes was a list of all sorts of languages. And one of our members came across Scorpion, translated into Arabic, was Albaran. And so we all got behind that name, and that has become our name. We liked it because in New Mexico, there's, of course, a Spanish heritage here. And during the Middle Ages, Spain was a total multicultural place between the Christians and Muslims and Jews that were there. So that's how we ended up choosing the name of Albaran. But the way things were back then was it was all like word of mouth. So the guy who started it actually had a friend in Dallas who had been a gamer in New Mexico, and his family moved down there. And he eventually would become Lloyd Von Acker. But the way things, he told us the way things were going to be is, well, you're the first group in New Mexico, so you'll be automatically a baron. So that's the way it worked in the early days. Like Raymond the Mild became founding baron of Madrona, and Michael of Moria became founding baron in Phoenix. So he was Baron Atenveld. But we found out later they changed the rules by the time we came along. But the way you founded a group was you would, write the board, and they would tell you, okay, you can, form a group there. But what happened to us is we founded Alberon, and then immediately there was another group that started up, and they thought they were going to be the barony. So there was Rivenstar. So they showed up with about as many people as we had, and it's like, no, you've got to be a household now because we are Alberon.
Were they from Albuquerque too?
They're from Albuquerque too. So we had, because of the confusion of trying to start groups, it took a while for letters to process, and the just time involved. But anyway, eventually we got together and formed a good group, and out of that group came Sir Bryn Malachi, who was knighted and vicar of Certa for a while up in Denver. So by the time we came along, you had to have 20 members to become a barony. So it took us like 2 years before we became a barony. And the rules for being a barony is I had to register the corporation with the state of New Mexico and petition to the kingdom and the board before it would even be possible. So we became a barony in 1976 finally.
How did you guys come up with the baronial arms?
I was Harold, so I just made them up and took them to Phoenix. We traveled a lot to Phoenix at the time. And at the time, Iosif of Loxley was Laurel King at Arms. So it was very easy to get past, what we were doing right at the beginning. Later, he would give up the job, and suddenly it became a lot harder to pass names and things.
So did you always come in as Raymond, and when were you changed to Raymond the Quiet, or was that from the beginning too?
No, actually, I love the idea of personas. So I came in as an American Indian and had 7 personas before I was knighted. So when I was actually offered knighthood, I was fighting as Ili of Kaliwu, and that was an American Indian persona. But I had thought about it before, and I knew I didn't want to be a master. I wanted to be a knight of the Outlands and eventually a knight of Adenveld. And so when the king actually called me forward, I had planned to beg a boon and ask the king to be knighted as Raymond the Quiet.
And so that's when you changed your name.
Yeah, it was on the day I was offered.
Cool.
And are you quiet?
Terribly.
Okay. I wondered if it was ironic or not.
No, I am known for my quietness. So that's why I chose Raymond the Quiet. And talking about heralds, when I was passing my name and arms, at the time, Karina of the Far West was Laurel Queen at Arms. And she said that, well, there's already Raymond the Mild, and he's a founding baron. And now you're wanting to pass Raymond the Quiet, and you're a founding baron. So I had to get written permission from Raymond the Mild to be able to be called Raymond the Quiet. But I had known him because at the time he was living down in Phoenix. So I don't know how long he was up in Madrone, but it didn't seem like he was baron all that long.
Well, it was nice of him to give you permission.
Yeah.
Did
you? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you had like a copy of the Known World Handbook, or did you?
Okay, this is the pleasure book.
The pleasure.
Oh wow.
So this is the book that I published. So this was published in 1977.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually predates the Known World Handbook.
Oh, wow.
In fact, Hillary of Serendip, after I published it, was kind of mad at me. It's like, well, we're doing the Known World Handbook, and that was a committee project. So that took a lot longer to actually happen.
Mm-hmm.
But when we first started, it was very hard to get information about any of the rules and regulations. There was the legendary Kapora, but I didn't see a copy till Chorus was king. So that's like, 8 years in.
Right.
And it was literally in like 3 like folders that were plastic and held together with one of those old like plastic press-on things. That's a copy I saw. So that's one of the reasons that we had no idea the rules, when we were starting, and let alone how to proceed. So we'd go to Phoenix, Arizona, and learn how to play the game, and go home and write in our local newsletter. This is how you choose a name. This is what a persona is. These are some dances. These are some costumes. This is calligraphy and how to, proceed and try and do some scrolls and stuff like that. And that's where the pleasure book came from. I was doing all that. So I would, at the time, after I published the book, I had the ability to fly around the country with my job. So I would go to different events and try and sell my book. And then it grew to more books. I eventually published a book on medieval costume and medieval games, 2 cooking books, and then worked with Sir Polydore Haraldson. And we reprinted his Hammer series into Best of the Hammer into 4 volumes. So
I think I have a couple of those.
Yeah, Sir Polydore Haraldson started the Middle Kingdom Armorers Guild. So when he was trying to learn how to do armor, he went up to one of the famous armorers of the time and wanted to learn from him. And the armorer was like, well, that's all, secret information, because I make a living at this,
Right.
So he was like, no, we're going to start a newsletter and try and get together and do stuff. But that was a different time. It's like they were trying to make Damascus steel. And, for years in the Best of the Hammer, they worked on that. And now you can watch Forged in Fire, and watch them make Damascus, right there on the TV.
Knowledge is much more freely given now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I still have the pleasure book on my website. It's $1. And if you use the code FREEPB, it doesn't cost you anything, and you get a PDF download of it. So the information is still there, and a lot of it hasn't changed that much, and it's free. So,
Are all of your books on your website?
no, I still have the best 3 of the Best of the Hammers, and all the other books are out of print. But I think there's much more useful and current information available in book form and on the web now. So a lot of the stuff I have is pretty dated. It was good for 1975.
Yeah. I the Hammer books and the Known World Handbook, I remember looking at those when we first started, and they were very helpful in an age where we didn't have internet.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot like you were sort of a creating worlds for the SCA with your books.
Well, I like to think I helped move things along.
So
for sure.
when you guys started Alberon, what were the activities that you mainly focused on, and how did fighting get into Alberon?
We started fighting from the first. So one of the founding members had actually been in the military, and he had been in the South. So he had 2 helmets, one of which was actually legal. It was made out of a refillable Freon can, which are a lot thicker than the throwaway Freon cans of the time. And the other one was made out of a Italian army pod helmet. But unfortunately, it had no face because the guy helping him with it, he got transferred before it was finished. So the first helmet the first helmet we were actually able to use was made by one of our members for me. So we went out to his place. At the time, he was the caretaker of a junkyard here in Albuquerque. And we walked around the junkyard looking for something we could use. And finally, we found a gas tank. And I was like, you can't, put a torch on that gas tank. And he's like, oh, no, it's all dried out. No problem. So he used his torch and cut out the face for it. And then we welded on bars. And then for that helmet, I put a Greek comb on top of it. So I wouldn't be breaking everybody's sword because it had a 1-inch lip on it. So that's where my personas started. It's like, well, I should have a Greek persona for my Greek helmet. But in the early days, we had 2 helmets. So we could, trade off, and we'd go, just trade off the helmets. And the first swords we used were actually shinai, a bamboo shinai. And they didn't last long at all. So one of our first trips was down to what they call the Firebird Festival in Phoenix to get some rattan. And we had the magic rattan after about May of 1973. So the group started about in December of 1972. And our first event was in April. And that was Ivar and Cassandria's wedding. And that's the fellow who was in the military. So that was our first event. And then we started going to Phoenix a lot. And when they'd have events, because there weren't all that many events back then. And we got going to the events during the summer, which in Phoenix is 120 degrees. So that doesn't work very well. And then their second major group was Tiriscathir, which was down in Tucson, Arizona. And that was a barony by then.
So did you have knights in your, you kind of started everything in your area, so you didn't have knights to teach fighting or to mentor anybody. Is that correct?
No, we would have to go to Phoenix to try and learn a few things. And back then, there was like one squire in the Kingdom of Adenveld, and that was Thomas the Demas. And he's probably about 60 years old now, and a knight, and like a former prince of the sun. But knights were not taking squires. So we tried to learn what we could and take it home. And the Phoenix group, a lot of them were actually living in one house. So they were practicing all the time. And a couple of them were pretty good athletes. Dennis the Titans was a weightlifter, and Deaton Claymore was a cowboy and rode the circuit for a while, that kind of thing. And then we had people like me who, the poor asthma kid.
But you managed to make it work.
Yeah. I was knighted in 28 months. So we started in December And I was offered knighthood at the Spring Crown Tournament AS9, 1972. And the King Robert called me forward. And at the time, the way all previous knightings had been was the king would call his knights forward and then say, one of our number is missing. And then they would go out into the crowd and bring the candidate forward and knight him right at that moment. So when I was called forward, it's like the first thing I did was, Your Majesty, I'd like to beg a boon to be knighted as Raymond the Quiet. And he granted that boon. And then he told me, well, I'm going to come to the Grand Outlandish Tournament and knight you there, which was going to be in May. So May AS10, I was knighted. But I had a month to prepare. And nobody before me had ever had any time at all to prepare. And at the time, Merhox of Morktorn and I were running a page school. So we had, about 10 kids that we were letting fight with ethyl foam, like a packing foam. And they all made their shields and taught them how to calligraphy stuff. And anyway, it's like, wow, this is a perfect opportunity for that page school. So what we did was have them have a project. And the project was, what is a medieval knighting supposed to be, right? So they came up with all of these things that I had to do, you know? So the first thing I had to do was, it's like, well, you've got to be in a white tunic, right? So I don't know if you can see my white tunic here, but my mother made this for me for my knighting in 1975. And no way I could fit in it these days. And then they were like, well, you've got to have a vigil. And at the time, luckily, one of our members was being the caretaker for a church camp in the mountains outside of Albuquerque. And so we talked to him and he invited us up. So I went up with my father confessor, Hieronymus the Sarabite, who was a good friend of mine. And we held a night's vigil all night. So I believe I had the first vigil in the SCA. It dates back from 1975. And my arms actually come from the vigil. So in the morning, you can see there was the morning star on one side of the cross. And on the other side of the cross were two flying birds. So that's where my arms came from, was the vigil in the morning.
That's really cool. Somebody is saying that Duke Rothgar was part of your page school. That's kind of cool.
I love that the whole all of the traditions that people have now before getting knighted, like wearing the white tunic and doing the vigil, and all it's all historically based, but that it came from the research of your page school, and that they started this tradition that is now known worldwide. That is super cool.
Yeah, I had to wear my sword that I would be knighted with around my neck, and they washed my head. So it wasn't a ritual bath, but it was the beginning of all that. And actually what happened was the next few nights we tried to have some kind of vigil. And then when Deaton Claymore became king, later he heard about my vigil and had me talk to the Belted Circle about it, and also write up an article for him as king. And so then the idea of the vigil started coming out.
Wow.
I love that.
Yeah, I just love how these things develop, and hearing about this history is just.
Yeah.
And I love that you took the month that you had and you did something so proactive with the kids. And I just think that's super cool.
Did you have in mind that you were laying a foundation for where the SCA would grow, or were you just doing fun stuff?
Uh, I was hoping things would grow. We tried to do things to encourage the SCA. It's like the day before I was knighted, I was told I had a job. And that job turned out to be a job working rotating shifts. So I'd work 2 swings, 2 days, and a mid, and every 6 weeks change back a day. So that really cut back a lot of what I could do as far as, showing up at fighter practice. And then at that fall crown tournament, actually, there was a 3-way final. And I was in a 3-way final with Deaton Claymore and Dennis of the Titans. And both Deaton and I were knighted, but Dennis of the Titan wasn't. And I was not prepared to be in the finals with the, 2 legends of the SCA. and they were at the time too. But they first knocked me out. And then the 2 of them were fighting. And they were both fighting for the same lady. So Samantha of the Shire would be queen no matter who won. And Dennis won. And he was knighted that day. So and then we became a barony, and he named me Baron. So I was Baron, and working these weird shifts, and but that gave me the opportunity and time to start doing things, like the pleasure book and the publishing, because I could do those by myself. It's kind of hard to fight by yourself, and stay motivated.
I think we're all discovering that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had said earlier that back then knights weren't taking squires. So I am assuming that you did not have a knight?
No. No, nobody in the Outlands had squires at that time or were squires. It's like I say, Thomas the Demas was a squire because he was a 15-year-old kid. And at the time in Aidenveld, they said you had to be of legal age to fight. So this is the early 70s, right? And this is just the time when they're lowering the legal age from 21 to 18, because it's Vietnam's going on, and they're like, well, all these guys are being drafted and sent off to war. And so they actually lowered the age limit just about the time we were starting. So we were allowed to fight in the crown tournaments in Aidenveld. And there were no authorizations. It's like you fight it, you show up, you have to fight a challenge fight before the tournament. And then you're allowed to fight in the crown tournament. There were no authorizations, and it was a different time. Squires started happening shortly thereafter, once we started having more knights, probably within 2 years.
What kind of weapon system did you run back then?
I always been a sword and shield guy. Now, I have always fought with kind of a kite, and let me explain why. So one of the first tournaments I ever went down in Tucson, the barony of Tirisgathir. So when Tirisgathir first started, the guys in Phoenix were like, you guys are just, not much, right? I'll tell you what, I will take on everybody in your group and defeat them all. So this one guy came down and attempted to take on all the guys from Tirisgathir. And what happened was his sword broke. And they were saying, well, you should have had that sword made in Tirisgath. So they actually had a song done about that. But we went to an event in Tirisgath there, and one of the Tirisgatherians was going to pass on this tradition. And so he was like, I can beat all you guys. So I had this brilliant idea. It's like, I told Hieronymus the Sarabite, my good friend there, it's like, okay, you go out there and just take his leg, right? And he's got to keep his blows, right? And then I will come along and kill him. Okay. So that worked for the first part. And then the second part, it's like lower leg blows were legal. So he came along with a grass cutter, literally 2 inches off the ground, underneath my shield, and broke my ankle. And so I was in a cast for 6 weeks with that. So shortly after that, it's like, no, you know what? This lower leg blow thing is probably not a good idea, you know? So things were changing as we were going along. You had to change the rules, you know? So I've pretty much stayed with a long kite ever since. And all these guys are, Raymond, you should come up and be a, you know, like a modern guy and have a center grip. And it's like, nah, probably not going to happen.
Was there somebody that was like a mentor to you for your fighting, or somebody that you patterned your fighting style on?
Not really. It's like, I always thought I was like fast because I could take people's arms. And then one of our early members actually worked for the National Lab here in Sandy National Labs. And at one time he brought out a system of lasers where he could measure sword speed. And so he set this up and actually measured sword speed. And it's like, no, I had the slowest sword of anybody, but I had wonderful timing. So I would take arms quite a bit in my early days. And so that was my specialty. So one time I went to the West and William the Lucky was like, well, you really need to fight out here. You know, people don't believe you can fight, you know, because you're always just pushing your books, you know. So it's like, okay. So we get out there and the first thing I do is take William the Lucky's arm, right? No, you don't take arms in the West. It's like the entire crowd was like, ooh. William the Lucky stops the fight and explains, oh, well, he's from Aidenveld. You know, they do that down there. But they were fighting the real high style. And you stick your arm way up there and it's like, wow, what a perfect target.
Thank you very much for that arm.
Gift wrapped.
Yeah. But that's one of the things I learned is like when you go different places, you have to really understand the rules of where you are. You know, we'd go to the middle and it's like there aren't any face thrusts, you know. And that was hard for Outlanders at Pindic War, you know. It's like, no.
Yeah, even now, like when you're watching a video of different crown tourneys in different kingdoms, you just have to be aware of what the traditions are, or you're just like, I don't understand what happened there. So,
Yeah.
Cool. So how did you get into metalwork?
Well,
or do we want to look at some pictures before we go there?
You want to talk about how I became a Laurel and Pelican first?
Yeah.
Okay. So in 1978, they start the Burrow Creek Wars, right? So we go to the war and there was a big flood in Phoenix. And so the king was like calling his knights and his laurels and his pelicans, right? Well, there's only 4 laurels there. in the entire kingdom. And so the laurels say, well, what about Raymond? He's a laurel. And it's like, no, Raymond's not a laurel. So actually they had a duchess speak for me as a fifth peer. At the time, that were the rules. You had to have 5 peers speak for you. And so that day they offered me a laurel. And so this is 1978, and spring of 1978. And so I assume I got my laurel for doing my books and armor, because I was kind of a small guy for the time, especially against people like Dennis of the Titans. And so I weighed about 160 pounds, so I got hurt a lot. So I kept making armor and showing up with new armor every time. So I think that impressed the laurels that I'd do that. And then I started the books. And so I didn't do any of the metal work at all for my laurel.
And then did the pelican come along sort of the same way?
Actually, I was the second pelican in the Outlands. So Theo Might-Grindwood was the first pelican. And so at an event there in the fall of 1978, AS 13, they offered me the pelican. And it's so that day he had his pelican that was made by Mistress Louise of Woods Home, and she would hand bend all the wires and totally, make them by hand, literally firing them multiple times in a kiln. And he said, "Well, this is the only one in the Outlands, so I've got to give it. You have to give it back at the end of the day." So it's like I had to get back my pelican medallion. And that next spring, we went to England, and we're walking around England in Hereford Cathedral. There was one of the bosses there. There was a pelican in its piety. And it's like, wow, we got to do that. And so that was one of the big inspirations for getting into the metalwork, was trying to provide a service for stuff that wasn't available. And it's like the first set of spurs I had were a German cavalry officer's spurs. And it's like, once I knew that, I didn't want to wear them. It's like, this is not very medieval, and it's German, and yeah, whatever, So we came up with the idea of trying to cast some spurs and make spurs for knights. So we started doing the Viking spurs. And now all of this is available, all over the place, and artisans are doing it and making them. But at the time, they really didn't.
Did you teach yourself how to cast?
Actually, I came into all the jewelry stuff at the right time, because I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And right before we got into any of this was a huge Indian jewelry boom. So everybody was wearing the silver cast jewelry with the huge turquoise pieces in it. And then the whole thing went bust. That whole kind of fashion was gone. So there were tons of people here who were casting, who were making stuff. And it's like, I became a facilitator for that more than the artisan myself. I've done very few of the pieces that are in the line. And then once I, had to work for a living, I did even less. So for about the last 20 years, I worked with a fellow, Dennis Liberty. And he was in the SCA right when it started. And he was a scrumpish pope of Rivenstone. He came out of that other group and had quit the SCA many years before. And I ran into him in McDonald's and we got to talking. And he was a wonderful artist, but the company he had worked for moved all of their production to China. And so for the last 20 years, he's been doing pieces for me. And that only stopped when the pandemic went in. And it's like, just can't keep going on. No shows, so I still get orders and I'm absolutely amazed people still want stuff. And I do cast stuff out in the shop. And now I do all my own casting, but I do it high tech. I bought a fancy machine from Rio Grande Jeweler Supply here in town. And for me, it's more of a science than an art. So it's like I cast my bronze at 2000 degrees exactly, under a shielding gas of nitrogen, but I do all my own work. I've had employees in the past, but a couple of years ago, I decided I'm too old for this. So I've cut back a bit and just doing it all myself right now.
You have such a huge inventory of product, or like a vast array of time periods and different things. It's amazing.
Well, that's 40 years of work, just keeping at it, and it's a way I could contribute to the SCA. So you asked about being a Pelican. It's like, that's what I feel I am now as a Pelican, and all the work I do in the SCA, it's like, it's a service more for me. I did earn retirement. So they pay me to stay home from the post office now. That's where I retired from 8 years ago. And they pay me Social Security. And, I don't need to do any of the metal work actually. So it's fun and time to keep doing stuff. But it's like when I got the Pelican, it's like after that, I became chronicler of Eowyn. And then when the Outlands split off, I became chronicler of the Outlands, but Eowyn still couldn't find somebody to print their newsletter because you only got so much money, for every subscription. And it's like, it wasn't paying the bills. They couldn't find anybody in Phoenix who would do it for the amount that the SCA was sending them, So for quite a while, I was chronicler of the Outlands and still printing the newsletter for the King of the Eowyn. And I had to print all my own books. So I'd be out in the shop, just printing, and then have piles and piles of paper and walk around my table and collate them all together. Try and con my friends into showing up so that, be a little bit quicker. So back in the day, it's like when you had a newsletter every month, it's like you'd have a collating party and then somebody would staple it together, put the labels on it, and then take it to the post office. Everything was mailed by bulk mail. So it was a big job, but I really missed the paper newsletters. Last year, I must admit, I ordered the newsletters for the Outlands. And it's like, all this pandemic year, it's like, about a one sheet. Oh, we're still going along. Here's all our groups. It's like, well, this didn't work very well.
I think we did a collating, at least one collating party for our, I thought I remembered that.
It's actually kind of fun. It was very social and
yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah, it's fun once.
I can see that. Someone is asking us to have you tell us about Great River.
Okay. So that all started with Duke Richard the Short. He was one of the first dukes from the West. is one of the original masters in the SCA. So he's one of the guys who said, "I will not swear fealty." And I believe his was because of his faith. And he felt he couldn't do that in the SCA. And so he became a master. Well, in truth, he was a college professor, and he moved to Las Cruces, New Mexico. Okay. But this is like 1971. Okay. So it's back to there are no rules. And so he was like, well, I'm not going to be here that long. So this isn't a real group. So we're going to make it a freehold. So it'll be the freehold of Great River. Okay. Well, shortly thereafter, he moved to Texas to take another job, but there was still the freehold of Great River. And they weren't very active, but they did have one interesting member, and her name was Eowyn of Amberdrake. And she, I think, was absolutely the first fighter in Adenville. And she later moved to Caid, and you might know her as Melinda Sherbring. And she sat on the board like 3 or 4 times and still, is active in the SCA. And she came out of the group of the Freehold of Great River. But once we became a kingdom, it's like there were some issues, and that group was dissolved, and now it's a regular shire down in Las Cruces.
Are they still called Great River?
No,
No.
It's Karoon, and I know I'm saying that wrong because I'm terrible with names. But it is no longer the Freehold of Great River. But it's like 1970, so you can do anything you want. It's like when we started the group, right? It's like, oh, we're going to Adenville, right? That's Phoenix. Well, there's Adenville. There's the barony of Adenville, right? Which is Phoenix. There's the Principality of Adenville, which was Phoenix, and they still use the title as Principality of Adenville. And then there's the Kingdom of Adenville, which is Phoenix. So for us, it was very confusing. In fact, I think one of the early kings did not know the fact that Adenville went clear to South Carolina and Florida when he won the Crown Tournament. And the kings, the first few kings that we had did not even travel east of Arizona. I think they were fairly used to traveling to the West Coast, because when they started, the people in Phoenix would drive from Phoenix to San Francisco for a weekend event. But this is, the late 60s. So, they were driving 120, I mean, we all had cars. My mother's car, she said, could pass anything except a gas station. And they would cruise all day at about 120. And stuff you would never do these days. But in 1974, right in the middle of trying to become Oberon, there's the Arab oil embargo, right? So we would literally go to an event, and it's like, okay, what's the last number on our license plate? Do we have to get gas when we get there on Friday or Saturday morning before we go to the event? So we'll have gas to get home.
Because it was odd even.
It was odd even on whether you could get gas that day, and you'd have to wait in a long line. Yeah. And it's like, there were, we'd travel to an event, and we were the only car on the highway. And it's like we'd get halfway between, and it's like we'd be low on gas. And it's like, my God, I hope a gas station's open soon.
Wow.
Do you want to do the pictures?
Yeah. Sorry. Pull those up.
So that's the Page School of Oberon. So they've all got their shields there and their helmets that they've made. And they all fought with foam weapons. And this is like 1975, right when I'm about the time I'm knighted.
Very cool.
I love the parachute tent behind.
Oh, that's high tech back then.
Yeah, that's great. Oh.
This is me at the first tourney I ever went to in Adenvelt. It was held in Flagstaff, Arizona in June 1973. And it was advertised as a warlord tourney. And it's like, oh, I wonder what that is. So we get there and it's like, oh no, you can't use your shields. You know, for most of the tournament, you have to fight with great swords and short swords and buckler. And we didn't have any of that. So I borrowed a buckler in the first round to fight William of the Shire, who was a knight at the time. And the buckler was Charles of the Jack's buckler. And what happened was he was a metal worker. He made probably the first total suit of armor in the SCA. And he cut it out of sheet metal with a cold chisel. So his buckler was steel and had no padding or rimming on it. So in my first fight, I fought William of the Shire, brought down that buckler, and as he killed me, I broke his thumb. So I got into the second round of the tournament, and they decided I had the bye, and it was a destructive bye. So I got to fight His Majesty the King, Raynard of Foxmoor, and that's him killing me with great swords. But that's my helmet right there.
I was going to ask.
Gas tank.
That was the gas tank.
That's the gas tank. Cool. And then I had that coxcomb on top with like a piece of leather to help, protect the swords from, getting broken on top of my helmet. And everybody tried to knock off that coxcomb as long as I had that helmet. But at least it was legal and we could fight.
Yep. Oh. There we go.
So that's me. And this is
sorry.
September.
I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty. There we go.
That's me at the first champion of tourney of Oberon. And I won the tournament and was named champion of Oberon. So 3 times I became champion of Oberon over the years. And that's my Lady Octavia at the time. And the guy who worked in the junkyard made that helmet for us for being champion of Oberon. Fortunately, it's been lost in time, so. And I talked about having my leg broken. So we had a cast decorating party and everybody put their coat of arms on my cast. But I hope that helped end lower leg blows in Adenville.
We all thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's our first event we ever had. That's Ivar the Far Travel and his lady Cassandra Eve. And they had a Renaissance wedding. And it was held at the Alumni Chapel on UNM. And it's a beautiful little chapel. It's all made out of adobe. And we had a medieval, as close as you can, event there. And the Bernies used that site quite a bit over the years. And that was April 1973. And that's the Page School of Alberon. And they did the scroll for me. And we taught them, a lot of them, how to calligraphy. So that's all their own calligraphy on the scroll. And so that's like a week after I came home from Crown Tournament where I was put on vigil. And so that's why it's signed May 1st, 1975.
Wow, I love that.
Now that's my triple Pier scroll. So that was given to me in 2002, actually. And they went back and had all three kings and queens who had given me my peerages sign my scrolls. So it was signed by Robert Roundpounder in Socorro. And he and she are a duke and a duchess. And signed by Chorus and Leah Casimir. And he's a duke and she's a duchess. And then signed by Jonathan and Willow. And he's a duchess and he's a duke and she's a duchess. So all three of my peerages were given to me by dukes and duchesses.
Wow.
And the scroll itself was done by our baroness at the time, Susan the midwife.
It's just beautiful.
It is beautiful.
And it has supporters of stags. And at the time, before this scroll was ever done, my wife, out of the blue, asked me, "Who would your supporters be?" And it's like, I have no idea. And I said, "I guess stags, you know." And then the heralds are like, "Those are only for the kings of Aidenfeld." So I got stags, even though I was never king of king of the Outlands.
How did the stag become the Outlands animal? Do you know? If there's not a story, it's okay. I thought maybe there was a story.
I think it comes from the first prince of the Outlands. And so he was a Viking that was Master Gunvald. And he ordered an axe of state instead of a sword of state to be made by Kirby Wise. And in that is a leaping animal. And I think we all saw a leaping stag in our axe. So that's Thunderhead. And then Kirby Wise also made our great sword of state. And so that is lightning.
Cool.
So once we became a principality, that was another issue with trying to get through the heralds. Karina of the Far West was still herald when we wanted to become a principality. And she was, "What are you the Outlands of?" So she didn't like the name at all. And for a while, she was going to try and force Outlands in a different language down our throats. But eventually we prevailed and we became Kingdom of the Outlands. And as far apart as everything is in this kingdom, I think it is the Outlands. It's a day's journey between almost all of our baronies. Our closest barony is 3 hours away.
So
But the stag has been very good for our kingdom as a symbol, and it's been used a lot. Last time I was at Burka, I ran into a baron who's from a group up in Maine, and they used the stag. And they were like, we tried to find stuff to put on our devices and awards and stuff, and you guys got it all covered.
good job. So tell us about this photograph.
Okay, this is me in the last time I was barren. And you see the little dragon there? Underneath the little dragon is like a little head. That's my daughter.
Sweet little bonnet.
Yeah. So she was born in 1980, and here I'm wearing the same chain I have on today. So you can see it's a lamp chain.
Mhm.
That's the way things were in the early days, and I still have mine.
Very cool. So does your
So
daughter play?
she has off and on. She's currently just moved back to New Mexico and is going to be moving up to the barony up in Farmington. She's taken a job up there. So I'm hoping that she will play again up there. So the only word she has in the SCA is the Promise of the Outlands, which we give to young people. But she's been to lots of events with me. This is my setup in 1992. So this is right before I started work for the post office. So I was still doing all the books you can see on the bottom shelf. And I made some armor, which is there. And then that's the entire selection of jewelry I had at the time. So if you can imagine how much it's grown over the years, now I have over 1,000 molds that I try and keep track of.
Wow. So what did you print your books on in your garage?
I had a Navy Dick 350 printer, and I used that for years. And I opened up a print shop between jobs and thought, well, I'll have lots of time. I'll work for myself. And it's like, no, I'm working 80 hours a week now. So that was not a good plan. And it was not a good time to go into printing with all of the computers coming out. So eventually I closed that business and went to work for the post office and put 20 years into the post office and retired 8 years ago. But that's my booth. So it would all fold up and become the trailer on the back of a flatbed.
Wow.
And that's me and my lady wife, Ginevra La Tisserand. So she's a laurel in her own right. So by the time she became a laurel, it's like the whole idea of a vigil had gone over, and all the laurels and all the pelicans had vigils.
Did you meet her in the SCA?
Yes, I sure did.
I think all three of us met our spouses in the SCA.
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, she does all my costuming. So.
Wonderful. And I think that's the last picture. Is that correct? Boy, I'm just not doing well. Yeah, it's the last one. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. There we go. So how long did you merchant at events? How long did you take that booth around?
I'm still taking my booth around. So I started with the pleasure book in 1977. And then slowly over the years, it grew into doing the metalwork. And over the years, the metalwork has taken over what I do. And I still do, well, when we have them. I was at the last Estrella and had planned to go to Gulf Wars, but we were packing up and they said it's canceled last year. Right now I'm reevaluating what I'm doing. I'm 67 years old. So, it's like, we shall see. But people still order stuff on the internet. So that's nice.
Yeah. That's a lot of stuff to lug around.
Yeah, I have a huge trailer though and a huge truck to pull it. So, but I started at like one of the first Pinzigs that was at Cooper's Lake, and if you remember the bathhouse there at Pinzig, the main one, it's like I was in that room, like above the showers, with the arts display, both of us, and we were there. You know, I was merchanting and they were having the arts display. So the first Pinzig I went to, they were having a meeting with all the Laurels. So I went to the meeting and it's like, there's a bunch of ladies here and me. And then they were like, well, what did you get your laurel for? And it's like, they didn't tell me, you know, but they all were like, well, I got mine for, you know, costuming or pottery or whatever. And I was shocked at that on the East Coast. It's like people get their, well, at the time, got their peerages for one thing, you know. And I don't think that's as much here in the West, you know.
We in Ontario, we aren't told what for a laurel is. That's not how we do it.
Yeah.
And I think that upsets some people. I think some people would really like us to be very clear and specific about what we're getting our laurels in. So.
Well, I think everybody always critiques the knighting ceremony. Like maybe we can critique the laurel ceremony. Like we should be telling the audience what this person's being recognized for, and maybe show us so that we know. I don't know, just saying.
I'll take that under advisement, like I have any control over anything.
Well, one of my friends who was a king once compared the Laurel Circle to a bunch of hippies getting all together. Hard to get them to follow his rules. The knights, he'd say, do this, and they would actually do what the king said. The Laurels, pretty much a bunch of hippies together in a big group.
So a couple people in the comments are talking about your squires. And as a triple peer, have you had students in all of your different lanes, I guess?
I've had several squires over the years. In fact, one of them is on the back of the pleasure book. That's Cathan Fitzgerald,
Cool.
who later became king in Calontir, and I believe is now living in Ontario with his lady wife.
He is.
And then another one of my squires became knighted and received his pelican. That's Dennis the Right. But when I was Baron, I never felt like, you know, I should be involved with politics, tried to be above that. But what I tried to do was the people who were knighted, I tried to always give them a white belt so that they would be part of the barony of Oberon and have a tie to me as Baron. So sometimes that didn't work out too well. So it's like I gave Master Gunvald my belt, and it's like he became a master. So it went from sort of like here on his armpit about to there to his neck. So you had to add like, I don't know, 2 or 3 feet to make it into something that's wearable, you know.
Yeah.
So when you got knighted, were there sort of legacy regalia, or is that something that you sort of facilitated?
There was no legacy regalia for me at the time. And I think that's grown over time, especially with squires and knights. And like I say, I tried to give all of the, you know, knights who were made in our barony belts, you know. And then it's like, Raymond, I want to give him my belt. And it's like, no, you give him something else. But shortly thereafter, legacy really started. And I think legacy is really important now, you know.
The Pelican medallion that you were given for the day, did that go on to become sort of a legacy medallion?
No, he eventually lost it. So that did not go that way. I've made medallions in the past where people have, you know, like written on the back of their device, all the people that, you know, in their household that have it, which is nice. This is my triple Pier medallion. So I've given a lot of those away over the years, more and more all the time.
Yep. Cool. Do you have any other stories that you want to share with us?
Yeah, there was some question about the buffet.
Mhm.
And it's like, I didn't receive a buffet when I was knighted. It was not done. And it's my belief that Chorus Natterhelm actually came up with the idea of the buffet. And in the talk you did with Deep Claymore, he said he gave the first buffet to Trudy Lacklandia in 1977. And so I'll trust his memory on that. But he and Chorus were very good friends. They were inseparable. So I think, you know, Chorus gave him that idea. And I believe it came from a book that Chorus had been reading. And the idea came to him, and it's like, we need to do this, you know. And so it started with Chorus's idea and Deaton's execution. Now Deaton was probably the first king who really, you know, extensively traveled the kingdom and started to make Aytenfeld a kingdom. Pontius Maximilian, who was before him, actually got a bus pass and tried to visit like all the groups in Aytenfeld and went from place to place. But I think Deaton and Kersheri really, as a couple, you know, worked hard at making Aytenfeld a kingdom. And he's the first one who moved the Crown Tournament out of Phoenix area proper.
Really started to envelop the rest of the kingdom into the group.
Yeah, and at the time, even back then, you know, the kingdom went to Texas and Oklahoma. And you can drive all day and not be through Texas.
True.
True.
It's a long way from New Mexico to Texas. It's like you can either go to Dallas or you can go to LA. You know, there's your choice.
Do you know the origins of any of the other traditions in the Outlands?
From our first tournament in Albuquerque, we named a Lord of Outlandish. And that tradition still goes along. And it's grown over the years. So now the Lord of Outlandish actually has a leather circlet that he wears. And his lady is, given a little circlet too. But that started right at the beginning. And I really think all of the dancing and drumming was really an outgrowth of the fact that we were Oberon. So we were, you know, more of an accepting group for the whole belly dancing community. A lot of the SCA, I think, frowned on that at the time. And it's like, no, we are, you know, this mixture of cultures, you know, we are Oberon. And so I think that grew out of who we were.
Before we started, we were talking about how you were the first walker of the way. Can you talk to us about the story behind that a little bit?
Well, that actually started before we were a principality. And we would, before we became a principality, we had several tournaments, and the winner could not be a prince. So, but it was like prince in practice. And one of the awards they came up with was the Walker of the Way, somebody who embodies the spirit of the SCA. And so Bryn Malachi, one of the first knights of Oberon, was the person who came up with that idea. And it's continued ever since. And every set of people who set our thrones has given one away.
Cool.
That's awesome.
So when I started, there weren't awards. It's like in Atenvelt, it's like you could get an award of arms, right? Or you could get the Light of Atenvelt, or you could become a knight or a laurel. And pelicans were just being thought about. The first one was actually Boncour, who was like the guy who took care of all the memberships in the SCA. And it's like, if he did that, he definitely deserves the first pelican in the SCA. But there weren't all these awards given. And I think that's one of the reasons I ended up being a triple peer so soon, was there weren't, awards. It's like, well, we got Raymond, what do we do with him? And I was in the right place at the right time to get peerages, and it's like my first award in the SCA was my knighthood, because at the time it's like I was the Seneschal of Oberon, right? So I'd go to the king and say, you need to give this person an award of arms, right? But I could never go to the king and say, you should give me an award of arms. So I never got an award of arms in the SCA until, came with some other award. But my first award was my knighthood.
Somebody's going to have to remedy that, like if you do the plain old AOA.
No, it comes with a lot of other awards. So over the years, I have several that belong with other awards. So I've got more than my share of awards in the SCA, and I think they need to give them to lots of other deserving people.
I never really thought about that though. Like you brought up that there weren't any awards back then, and people always wonder why it takes longer to peerage now. And that I've never thought about that, but it is because there's so many other intermediate awards now that you can recognize people without giving them a peerage. So of course it's going to be longer. That's interesting.
Things to think about.
Yeah, but back in the early days, it's like I talked to one of the early duchesses, and it's like, well, let's see, I was started in 72, knighted in 75. That's 3 years. It took me 3 years to be knighted. And she was like, man, it took you a long time.
That it's all relative, right? Like I think it took me 7 years to get knighted, and at the time I thought it was a very long time. And one of my friends just got knighted after like 27 years. Just like, yeah, not so long.
Yeah, well, I tell people it's like, well, it took me 3 years, but that's 1/3 of the time of the SCA. So now it should take you 15. Now there's a lot more people. It's like there's no way you could start, and have 7 personas and be knighted because nobody would know who you were, But when we're there with 15 people at the crown tournament, and we can all reach our hand out, right, and touch the sword. all of us. That's kind of a small tournament.
We can't even begin to do that up here.
No.
No, I've heard about your crowns, but it sounds interesting. You have open crowns. So.
Well, they're sort of open. You have to ask for permission, but and sometimes they're more open than others. And if you play with our kingdom quite a bit, you're more likely to be told yes. So,
well, I've set foot in your kingdom once.
Do you want to fight in our crown?
I went to the West Ontier one year. Then they moved Battlemore, and it conflicted and couldn't go anymore.
When you went to West Ontier, was it at the site near the ocean?
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful site.
We like that site.
Yeah.
Do you think that you've been in every kingdom? Have you traveled that much?
No, I've not been in quite a few kingdoms. I've not been to any of the Canadian kingdoms, and I've not been to Drachenwald, not been to Lockhack, and I've not been to Trimaris. But all the other kingdoms I've been in.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Huh. I can't cross that border into Canada with stuff.
That's true.
They make it very hard.
Yeah. And right now we can't cross that border into Canada at all. So.
No, I can't. I'm hoping for events.
Yeah, same.
But your talks have really encouraged me to begin to think about new things again. Oh. It's like back in the early days, it's like, we were all by ourselves, so we could do anything. And it's like one of the first weapons we ever came up with was, we're going to make this morning star. And it's like, it was great. You could kill anybody with a morning star. And we took it to Adenfeld, and they're like, no, you can't use that. It turns out that Henrik of Hahn won his first crown with one back in the day. But it's like we were so isolated that we could, come up with ideas and do stuff. And, I'm hoping more people use this time alone by yourself to reevaluate and come up with things and redo.
Yeah, I definitely have started making a list of the really cool things that I've heard other people have done in their kingdoms, and in hopes that maybe we can start doing some of them here, because this game has so many permutations in so many places. And I think that we can really get stuck in a rut of doing the same thing the same way. And there are a lot of options out there.
There's so many fighters I've known who have quit playing because they can no longer fight. And it's like, once I found my fighting limited by my jobs and life, I found other things to do. And, I am not known for my fighting. I think I'm known for, the Raymond's Quiet Press, So it's a shame. I'd like to be known for my fighting, but maybe next year.
Yeah. That's true though. There's just so many facets to what you can do in the organization. I always hurts my heart a little bit when people think that they don't have anything to offer if they can't fight anymore. So
there's more to it than just fighting.
Definitely.
And fighting really is kind of the core of what we do. I mean, everything is really built around it, so there's no stopping that.
I won't go on my whole Scrabble versus Boggle rant. Anyway.
Yeah, but you know, in the early days when we would go to Edenvelt, it's like we'd always try to learn something new and bring it back. So let's learn a dance and we'll bring that back. And literally for me, it was sword foot, shield foot, because I am a terrible dancer. But we learned something, brought it back and shared it. And people who actually knew something took it and ran with it, you know, and there's just so many possibilities, I think, in the SCA that I'm excited and I'm ready to come back, you know.
What are your plans? What do you want to get into next?
I'm excited about fighting, actually. So we'll see if that works.
Well, Duke Johann says you were known for your fighting. So
I'm sorry?
Duke Johann says in the comments that you were known for your fighting.
Well, that was a long time ago. Yeah, in several of the talks, you know, they asked who they wanted to be king. And it's like a couple of dukes said my name. And it's like, well, that's an inspiration, you know. So
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, I talked to Henrik of Hahn at the last Australia that he came to, and we were talking about fighting. And he fought on the 50th anniversary of his knighting. And it's like, all right, 4 more years, you know, 2025, you know.
Yeah.
That'll be mine.
Sir Leah up in Artemisia still fights, and she's in her 70s. So
yeah,
it's possible. Well, do you have any other topics you want to talk about, or should we do the final 10?
There's one thing from the past.
Okay.
That let's see, one of the dukes that you interviewed from Edenvelt had said that he was an unbelted duke and nobody had been a duke who had, been king, had been an unbelted king, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in actuality, there were 2 kings of Edenvelt who were not peers, belted peers at the time. The first was Joseph Golden Dragon the Good, and he became a master after he was king. And then Robert Roundpounder, who knighted me, was a master, and then resigned that to become a knight, and then resigned his belt over the knighting of a certain individual. And so he never became a knight or master again. And so both of them did not have belts when they sat the throne. And then 3 early kings, Stephen von Geist, Pontius Maximilian, and Dennis of the Titan, they were all knighted on the field after winning. So
Very cool.
But that's early days, you know, but you know, I think people forget our history.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, it's kind of interesting. In the early days, people would resign their belts, you know, over a king's actions. You know, they felt so strongly about it, and
that still happens here.
Does it?
Yeah.
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 But that doesn't happen too much in the Outlands anymore.
So Viscount Kith wants to know who held the sword for your knighting.
It was held by Ton the Traveler. So he came to Alberon to hold the sword for my knighting.
Very cool. All right. So should we do the final 10 then?
Yeah.
Okay. What event have you never gone to that you would like to go to?
So one of our early fighters, Alexander, moved to England, and later became like their prince, which is not legally a prince, of Isla Draconis. And his cornetting was in a medieval castle. And it's like, I heard that, and it's like, I want to go there. I want to be there and see that. So at some point, I will go to Drachenwald and see events in real castles.
I hear that Raglan is the castle event to go to. So
The people we've interviewed from there, when they show their castle pictures, it's like if you could fight anyone in the world, who would it be?
Well, it's like, why do you fight people? And it's like, I don't feel I'm at a level where I'm going to learn, but I want to be on the field with somebody to honor them. And so I would like to fight you on the field the next time we're at the same event.
Excellent.
For the honor.
Let's make it happen.
Let's make it happen.
Cool. Do you have a favorite Penzic story?
My favorite one is probably the one where I, set up in the barn at the first one. But I was at one where it was the first one that, let's see, Paula Bellatrix, I think was there. And it was a resurrection battle. And I had died. So I was walking back, and there's Paul limping along. And it's like, Paul, just kill yourself and go back to Resurrection Point. He says, no, I'm going to catch up with the battle. I don't know if he ever caught up with the battle, but it's that's who he was and still is.
That's really funny. Who are your favorite people to watch fight?
That would be Duke Arton. And he is the, I think, greatest Duke of the Outlands. He went to the West when he was going to school out there and finaled in their crown tournament. And he was just amazing. In Duke Johann, when they were fighting together, it's like, I could beat all these guys, but I'm never going to beat those two. So I've heard a lot of the Dukes talk about mindset, and maybe it was mindset, but I think they were just too good.
Very cool. Do you have a hero or a mentor in the SCA? And if so, who is it?
The first prince of Edenvelt and first king of Edenvelt, Richard Ironstein. So the first time we went to Edenvelt, he took us into his home and welcomed us, and was just an amazing fighter. One of the early tournaments I went to, he was on the field, and like a whole group of fighters went to the field. And I was like, what's going on? And it's like, well, Richard's fighting. And it's literally, after the fight, they were literally hauling him off the field because he was so into that fight. And I wish I had that, ability to do that. And the first crown tournament we ever saw was the crown tournament that he lost to Robert Roundpounder. And I think that's the last crown tournament he finaled in. And he never became a Duke. And his title is actually Crown Baron, because in the early days, there, hadn't settled on titles. So his title that he uses is still Crown Baron.
Love that.
That's really cool.
All right. If you had to recommend one event in your kingdom for someone out of kingdom to go to, which one would it be?
Well, I'm partial and I love outlandish. And unfortunately, New Mexico in May is real hit or miss. And we had beautiful sites that were wonderful, and we outgrew them, and we can never go back there. So for many years, we were traveling around in horrible wind, and we have microclimates. So we finally have a site now that's on some private land, but it can never get big again. But the wind just pops over the hill, and it's funny, at the top of the trees, you'll see the trees just waving, at the tops. But down on the ground, it's like it's a wind, like shadow. So currently it's not too bad. But at one time we had 1,200 people there.
It's a big one. What book do you think everyone on the path to knighthood should read?
So one of the first knights in the SCA was Sir Bela of Eastmarch. And his real name is Paul Anderson. And I don't think the SCA would have existed if they hadn't got into that first Science Fiction Worldcon, because from that, it really grew. But back in the 1950s, he was writing books about drawing people in different eras. So he did 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, and he did the High Crusade. And then later, after he got into the SCA, he did Rolf Krage's saga, which I believe is a Danish saga. And so I'd suggest reading Paul Anderson's books, because he is a huge force in the early SCA. And he is one of the original Knights of the Silver Mullet of the SCA in the West. So people loved him, and he's passed away.
Well, I wrote that down because I don't think anybody's ever said that before, and I've never even heard it. So
Old guy.
If you could change one thing about the SCA, what would it be?
I would change the way we choose barons. I absolutely hate the way we've always done it. So when I was chosen baron, the king, Dennis, just said, you're going to be baron. And it's like when they needed a baron down at Tyrus-Cathir, it became a barony. And the king at the time said, my good friend's going to be moving down there. He's in the Air Force. We're going to make him baron. And it's like, that did not work. You cannot bring a foreigner in as a baron, And currently, we in the Outlands, it's like you put your name in, and then they have 3 or 4 couples, and they have a secret ballot, and then they choose, the crown chooses from that ballot. But what you do is piss off 2 or 3 people who would have been great, and it's a hard job. I did it for 6 years. So the first time I told the king, look, I can't do this. I'm working all these crazy hours, can't go to events, can't go to the Bruno meetings, can't go to any of the planning stuff. And he said, no, you're king for life, So I don't know if that was any better, but I think the current way of doing it is just not very good. And I'd like, to come up with some better way.
Do you have a better way in mind, or is that still kind of mulling around?
But I think if it wasn't quite so public, it would be better. Where if you're turning people down, they feel like they could try again next time,
Yeah.
So many of our people try once, and then, they would have been great, but, there were 2 people that were better than them. And so they're never going to do it, you know.
And
So,
there's only so many people that are going to put their name in time after time and get shot down, right?
exactly.
And it's a tough job. I think I've never done it, but I've always heard it's the hardest job in the SCA.
Yeah, well, I was barren for life. It's like, no, I'm barren till you're no longer king.
So what's your favorite medieval-esque or period movie?
Hands down, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So that came out in 1975, right when I was knighted. And we literally had people going around, you know, clicking the coconuts, walking around with a cart, bring out your dead. We had monks who would walk around and hit themselves with the boards. You know, it was just took over the SCA. And, you know, that was just wonderful for the time.
Very cool.
That's awesome.
All right, last question. What do you think is the most important trait to become a successful fighter?
Time. I've seen, you know, people talk about 10,000 hours, and it's like, where do you get those 10,000 hours? And it's like, well, I know you were a swimmer before, and I think all that time counts, you know. So any athletic background you have helps a lot. And then, you know, it's like you gotta be there at fighter practice. You gotta go home and, you know, hit that pedal, and you've gotta have that time, you know. And I felt I was always short-circuited on time. I was never an athlete. And then I ended up in jobs where I was, you know, working weekends or strange shifts. And, you know, that's one thing about the current pandemic is I have time.
That's what I keep saying. Like, it's this opportunity to really take the time that you aren't commuting or whatever, and do the things that you don't think you have time for and just make them a priority.
Yeah.
If you can function.
Yeah, I just sort of work through my dysfunction.
Yeah, well, currently my shop is at one of my friends' place. It's 30 miles away from my house. So I commute that way. And I'm spending that time working on strengthening my hands
Oh, good.
and strengthening my elbows and strengthening, you know, just holding some weights.
Do you
And
have one of those grip things that you do while you're commuting?
I'm currently using like an egg
Okay.
with
Yeah.
my fingers.
Yeah.
So to get the finger strength, because I need that. And then my elbows, I blew out an elbow a long time ago. So it's like, got to be careful of that.
Yeah.
So talked to one of my friends whose wife is a physical therapist. And so I just put my hand up like that on the steering wheel and hold it for like count of 15, you know.
I love it. You're being creative and multitasking while you commute. That's cool.
And I'm listening to your YouTubes.
There's a wealth of knowledge out there. You know, there's a lot of commonalities, but I think in every interview we get some nugget that's different, a different perspective or a different way of saying something. And you know, if people have the time to listen to everyone's stories and their journeys, there's a lot to be learned.
Yeah. It's been an incredible learning experience.
So
Any parting words?
Can I show you my sword?
yeah.
Oh, yes.
So this is learned from those podcasts. Okay. So this is a sword to use on a pel, right? So one of the guys suggested getting shrink wrap and putting it on your sword. So I think this will work for a pel sword for me because it should last longer than just the bare rattan.
Right.
And then you also now get your blade on it. and I got my thrusting tip.
Nice.
And then I have double things
Triggers.
so that you can do it right-handed and then use the same sword for left-handed. So maybe I can learn to do something with this stupid hand. This has always been my stupid hand, you know. So, but all that learned from your videos and listening to people.
About
beautiful basket hilt that you have.
Yeah, it's very pretty. It looks like it's laser cut.
Yeah, yeah, you can get these from Jason Smith on Facebook.
Very pretty.
So he makes them. He's down in that old Great River group down in Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Cool. What I was going to say is I think it had to be about 10 years ago. I met Sir Mari and her boyfriend at the time, and he was adamant about doing pell work with both hands and making sure you do as many blows with both hands. So I've been doing that for about a decade now, and I swear to God, and I love it when somebody takes my sword arm because they aren't expecting that my shield arm knows what it's doing. So every time someone arms me, like in our kingdom, we don't really arm very often, and they'll usually ask you to keep it, and I'll be like, no, it's all good. It's all good. I'm good here. So
I'm gonna keep your ass left-handed.
Yeah, doing your pell work with both hands is super key.
Well, I always loved taking arms when I was young, and then I would give up my shield, you know, and then it was a act of chivalry. So back in the day.
Yeah.
So the last princess of the Outlands retired the Principality Shield of Chivalry to me. So I have that. So I like to think I was an honorable fighter when I fought. And I hope right now to get out there and hit that pell, and we'll see what I can do. And maybe make that 50th anniversary along with Henrik of Han.
Very cool. Are you planning on going to any of the wars they've rescheduled for the fall?
Right now, my time's sort of up in the air. I'm spending more time with my parents. They're 91 and 93, and they're still in their own house, and because it's not safe for them to go to any other place.
Yeah.
But they're definitely slowing down. So I'm helping my sister. So I will try to, but.
Well, I'm asking for selfish reasons because I want to know where you're going to be so we can have our fight. But I will, when I go to an interkingdom war, I will email you and say, hey, you're going to be there.
I'll come up to Ontier Crown.
Okay, that would be cool. Super cool. All right. Well, people don't know this, but you actually approached me to be interviewed, and I really appreciate that because I don't know everyone to interview, and this has been amazing. Your pictures were incredible, and your memory of all the Outlands history and the Atenvelt history has been really, really fun to hear. So I really appreciate you reaching out to me and agreeing to do this. So thank you.
Well, I think a lot of our history is being lost. And it's like you were asking, well, you know, you asked Henrik, you know, where did these vigils start? And he had no idea. You know, that started out in, you know, away from the West, you know, a lot of things started away from the West, you know, and that history is lost.
Yep.
And it's like, you know, we all know our little part, you know, so we should share what little bits we know before it's gone, you know.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool to see, like we always think things come from, well, at least the kingdoms that have calved off from the West, we always think our traditions come from there, and they don't. You know, the vigil came from the Outlands, so that's pretty cool.
Super cool. So if you're watching and you have a bit of history that you'd like to share, definitely contact us. I am also looking for Laurels to interview for a branch of Laurels. So drop us a private message on the Sisters Interview page, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, and I even though I got to 100 Dukes, I am still interested in interviewing Dukes if you're interested in talking to me. So yeah, so just send us a message. You can either private message me or message us on the Sisters Interview page. That would be great. Do you want to talk about who you're interviewing next Tuesday?
Next Tuesday, I have Helen Jennett of Foxhall. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. And then Wednesday we have
Sir Antonio from Ontier, who is a SCA history buff and just sent me, like, I don't know, 3 dozen pictures a couple days ago. So it should be really fun because he's a very sarcastic sense of humor. And he's very into history and Bardic, and it should be cool. So join us next Wednesday and we should have as much fun as we had tonight. So thank you again, Sir Raymond. It's been such a pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.